we often have
Hi, Neil.
a lot of introductory stuff, so we can do some of that stuff and then get to the business at hand. Welcome everybody to the June meeting of the Alternative Voting Methods Statewide Task Force. Are you seeing the welcome sign? And now the agenda?
Yeah.
Now the agenda.
Okay, so there's only one thing on this agenda. We could do more, but I think this might be enough for the entire hour and a half that we have allotted. We're going to discuss Initiative 310, which is the final 4 ballot measure that we expect to be on the ballot this fall. When you signed in, you said that you would behave, and it's very important that the league speaks with one voice and we reach our positions based on member consensus. Those positions guide our stances that we take on ballot measures. Here's what we did back in May. We had 28 attendees. We talked about these various things. You can see a recording of the meeting at that link that's right there. And that's also where slide decks are if you want to follow along with this slide deck or see previous slide decks. Initiative 310 was on the agenda last time. It was still in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that the title was fine, and we said that we would continue our discussion at this meeting, perhaps with a political scientist. Seth Maskett was actually mentioned by name, and he has graciously agreed to be here to answer questions that we might have and to give his perspective if we'd like to hear it. I'm always happy to hear everybody's perspective. So let's do some meeting introductions right now. I'm Celeste Landry, and I am the facilitator for this group, and I've been involved with Better Voting Methods since 2011, December, when somebody came to speak to the Boulder County League about the Fort Collins initiative that failed. Beth, do you want to just say hi?
Sure. Hi, I'm Beth Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Thank you all for being here. I apologize for being off camera. I kind of took the day off and therefore I'm not very presentable. But appreciate you all. Maud is taking over hosting duties. Thanks so much.
Maud, you want to go next?
Sure. Maud Nerol, League of Women Voters of Colorado board member, co-director for Action and Advocacy. It took 2 of us to replace Tony Larson.
Tony, you want to go next?
Sure, I'm Tony Larson, obviously with the League, and I am now the ballot issues person. So I'm tracking all the ballot issues, which is no small task this time around.
So Tony, why are you at this meeting?
Where am I? I'm on my phone because
no. Why are you at this meeting? What relevance does
it's a
this
ballot
have to
issue?
Okay, Jerry, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Jerry Cummins. I'm with the League, former state board member and voter service chair.
And has done a lot of work on statewide ballot measures in the past. Okay, Barb, you want to go next?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. Barb Winery, League of Women Voters. I'm co-director for voter services. Jerry laid a nice path for me to follow. I'm trying to do my best.
And she's doing great.
Well, thank you. But anyway, I'm here to learn about this ballot issue because I need to.
And for those of you who don't know, Barb was honored at our Leader of Democracy event on Saturday because of her work fighting the Weld County Commissioners not following state statute, specifically House Bill 21-1047.
Correct.
Okay, Neil.
Hi, I'm Neil McBurnett, league member for about a quarter century, active in voting methods for longer than that. Very engaged in election integrity for over 2 decades and how to audit IRV, among other things. And the league's representative on the Bipartisan Election Advisory Commission that the Secretary of State runs in Boulder.
Pat and Frank.
Hi, I'm Pat Ventura. This is my husband, Frank Ventura. We've been league members for a long time, and we've been on the voting methods team for Boulder County League for a number of years.
Mary.
I'm Mary Carter. I'm with the Larimer League. This is my second year as a league member. And I've done quite a bit with voter services and registering voters, and also circulated petitions related to women's right to choose this past spring. So I was pretty involved in that. I did a little work on the Fort Collins ranked choice voting, just basically support, helping distribute literature, that kind of thing. But I've been very interested in this for quite a while, and I'm a new member to Kathy Wilson's Legislative Action Committee in Larimer, and I definitely see a relationship there. And personally, I want to know whether to support this or not. So I think learning about it, the more I can learn about it, along with that wonderful, huge document you sent me that I'm working on, I just feel like being educated on this issue is very important. So thank you.
And whose group did you say you're working in Larimer County?
Well, in addition to like voter services and some other groups that I'm involved in, Kathy Wilson heads up our Legislative Action Committee for the Larimer League. And so I've started attending those meetings, and I'm going to have more of a role going into the future in that group.
Kathy Wilson works very closely with Maud. So, okay, Joe.
Oh, hi, I'm Joe Dix. I'm a Gunnison resident, friend of Brenda Freeburn, who's the chair of League of Women Voters for Gunnison. And I talked with Brenda at another meeting the other day and said that I would report back to her. I know she takes part on occasion, not every time.
Thank you so much. She's taken on a big role with the presidency there. So we're very happy to have you and have Brenda in spirit. Mark from Minnesota. Oh, it says you're connecting. Let's move on to Ron Tupa. And Ron, you are actually on the agenda at some point, just to let you know.
Oh, did you say I'm on the agenda?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for inviting me and letting me attend the meeting and listen. My interest in 310, as Celeste might have mentioned, is I passed the legislation when I was a state representative in 1995 and 1998 that helped unaffiliated candidates and third-party candidates get on the ballot. And obviously, if you've read through 310 and the white paper that you all had prepared, you know, it basically knocks off the minor parties in the fall, which is the automatic ballot opportunity that they have now, the access that they have now. That goes away. So I'm against the initiative, but I'll be looking forward to the discussion and hope that the league will come out against the initiative. So I'm just happy to be here and give you my thoughts. Thank you.
Mark from Minnesota. You're muted. We'll come back to you, Mark. How about Seth, our invited guest?
Hi, my name's Seth Maskett. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Denver and director of the Center on American Politics here at DU. And I've done a fair amount of research and writing on primaries and primary reforms. I'm definitely interested in this topic. I don't really have a hardcore recommendation one way or another on this thing, but I'm definitely happy to answer questions about some of the existing research in this area.
And we told Seth that he did not have to have a presentation. So I didn't want to make this hard for him to attend. So, okay, Mark, you're here. Do you want to say hi? You're muted. And while you turn on your microphone, I just want to say we're expecting Peggy Leach and also Jeff Withers, but they're coming late. Any luck, Mark? You want to just wave to us? Okay. Mark has been working hard in Minnesota on various voting methods issues. So, okay, why don't we go ahead and move on to the rest of the agenda because we have a lot to talk about. Feel free to interrupt anytime. Okay, here's some news and events coming up just to let you know. Right after this meeting, there's a talk about disability rights and RCV, and I actually emailed the contact person to say, is this going to include only IRV, or is this going to include instant runoff voting single winner, or is it going to include the top two bottoms up instant runoff voting, or is it going to include the proportional form of RCV? And they said that it is only about how to mark the ballot. So it's not, maybe not all that interesting. Oops, that's what it looks like if you want to register. I messed up here. Let me go back to where I was. I wanted to put this in the chat, but I think I can't do that so easily. Okay, we won't worry about that. Other things coming up. Election Day is next week. There's a National League convention. There are some national party conventions. And every month, except for July and August, there's a Proportional Representation 101 webinar that if you haven't attended, I suggest you attend, and especially if you don't know very much about proportional representation. Anybody else have anything to add to this list of stuff happening? Okay, we'll move on. Our next meeting date is going to be the 4th Monday of July instead of the 3rd. I forget why. Maybe I'm out of town. Mark has talked about giving a presentation on how the U.S. House could pick the winner using a contingent election. I don't know if Mark's interested in doing that at some future event or not. You can just nod your head if you want to. Okay, Mark's interested in that. And then August, we may or may not have a meeting. I can't make August 19th, which is the normal meeting time. But I guess if anybody wants to speak up about August, now's a good time. But otherwise, we'll just move on and get to the business at hand. Okay, so the only thing on our agenda is the Initiative 310. Here is the language. I highlighted the most important parts. I'm assuming everybody has read this or has the general idea for it. So the status right now is the initiative is collecting signatures. We expect it to get on the ballot with no problem because the backers are well funded and should be able to pay to get the signatures collected. In terms of the league, we take stances on ballot measures, and we've started taking stances sooner than we did in the past. So now that this initiative 310 has approval to collect signatures, we are considering a stance on it, and that would encourage or might discourage people from signing. And thanks to Seth Maskett for agreeing to be here today. Any questions on the status? Okay, I sent everybody, and this is also on the
I did.
alternative voting
Celeste,
methods.
I had a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So my question, if you can answer this now, this would help me, is how is 310 any different than 188? Since I know that I read 188 as well. It looks to me like it's exactly the same as 310. What's the difference? Because I understand the same proponents of 310 are trying to get 188 through, but it's before the Supreme Court now. I don't, what's the difference? Does the league know?
Tony, did you want to take that question? I mean, they're basically the same, is
Yeah.
the general answer.
That's what I would say. They're basically the same. 310 is preferred by the group that is proposing it. And I expect they will withdraw 188. I don't know that for sure, but only 310 will be the one that is run, that is supported. That's the one right now that's getting petitions, signatures. So they're really basically the same. I don't know if you know, Ron, that I think there were 30 proposals on conduct of elections, which 310 and 188 were proposed, and you do know how the title board works and what you have to do. And so they were just testing different things. And the one that they prefer, as they call the North Star, is 310.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I didn't notice a difference either. I did see that they filled out 30 or however many that they did. So thanks. I expect 188 might just be pulled. Then I'm kind of surprised that it's still in legal limbo.
Yeah,
But,
I'm surprised too, but it's the last I looked, it's in the Supreme Court. So maybe they'll wait until it's out of there.
Has the Supreme Court considered 310, or did anybody
Yes.
approve it there?
Yes, they did.
And they approved it.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there were more than 70 of these election reform initiatives that almost all of those 70 had this final four. So I would say way more than 30. So this is a little explainer guide on the difference between the current system and the proposed system, and also notes what would not change. This slide is only about the primary, and there was a mistake last month on this very bottom right-hand one. It said have less than 4 candidates, I think, something like that, but we corrected it. So now now it should be okay. Basically, you've run the primary election, even if you don't have 4, even if you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 candidates. So, okay. And then here's what's going on with the general election. And now's a fine time to ask a question about the wording on any of these slides. If you have a question, we're hoping this is a useful guide for people. I actually sent this to a reporter, so they would understand the way, I wanted to be helpful to a reporter.
Celeste,
yes.
Mark just got out and got back in, and he now has audio.
Okay.
And also, I may need to leave. I'm host, but I may need to leave early, and I'm hoping Pat will take over as host when I leave. So.
I hope Pat heard you. Mark, did you want to say something now that you have audio?
No, I'm glad to be able to talk to you all.
We're
I have no idea
glad
what happened.
too. Okay, so the little explainer had some other comments. So some of the impacts are that the primary election will no longer be a vehicle for choosing a party's nominee. It'll just be a way to winnow the field. And that's part of what Ron's here to talk about. Minor party and unaffiliated candidates will have to campaign in the June primary rather than waiting until the November general election. And 17-year-olds who will be 18 in November, they were allowed to vote in 2020 in the primary, but since the passage of Amendment 76 in November of 2020, the Attorney General has interpreted, excuse me, Amendment 76 to say that 17-year-olds can no longer vote in the primary. A third of the states let 17-year-olds do that, but they're not letting them do it in Colorado anymore. And then advancing 4 candidates is better than advancing 2. 2, you can still have vote splitting. So we'll talk more about this. Ron, we'll give you a platform, Ron, later. In terms of instant runoff voting, we call it instant runoff voting because RCV can mean a whole group of voting methods. Instant runoff voting does not guarantee a majority. And the League of Women Voters of Colorado is very clear about that. And we advocated in writing and in person at the title board to make sure that majority was not part of the language in the ballot title. And then IRV is subject to the center squeeze problem, which we can talk about more if people are interested. Here is our national position, and some of the sections are in bigger font because they're more relevant to number 310. And here is our state position, which we put up usually at the beginning, but it's here instead because now is a good time to talk about it, or refer to it. Okay, so partisan primaries. In that little mini report that you got, we outlined 3 problems. Many voters' voices aren't impactful. They can incentivize those partisan primaries can incentivize polarization. And Seth, I don't know if you want to say anything right now about that or.
Well, I just, some of the things that we had talked back and forth about. I was part of a research project about a decade ago with a number of other political scientists. We had a piece published in the American Journal of Political Science on this. What we did is that we looked at basically the voting behavior of all the state legislators in all 50 states and looked to see how that differed by whether these were people nominated in closed primaries versus open primaries or semi-closed, semi-open. And what we overwhelmingly found is really not much of a difference, that it didn't seem to matter how open or closed the primary was that got them in office. It didn't seem to make them more or less partisan in their voting behavior once they were in a state legislature. Now, there's been some other evidence suggesting that like some other different systems, California's top 2 system, Washington's top 2, possibly top 4, can produce some changes. I think fairly modest, but some. But a lot of the other, the status of things as of about 10 years ago, we weren't really finding many differences along these lines.
This is all a work in progress. We're learning as we go along. Partisan primaries definitely incentivize strategic voting. I mean, you can hear about people talking about voting for the lesser of 2 evils or considering electability. A benefit of partisan primaries is that it obligates the parties to gives them some responsibility to vet their party's candidates, which somebody should vet candidates, and it's hard for the public to vet all the candidates. So this is maybe a good thing for parties. And I think, Seth, you're the league tries to stay out of party politics, but I think Seth is, as a political scientist, you see the value of partisan primaries more, perhaps. So we could talk about that some more too. And then one question, and I don't know the answer to this, is how would the role of money in politics change for better or worse under a Final Four system? So some general comments, and this is all in that report. Note that this is a statutory change. If this were a constitutional change, the league would probably come out against it sort of automatically. An interesting thing is that it doesn't apply to all partisan offices, and it doesn't, and that'll come up in one of the questions later. I find that a little confusing. One of the things that was very controversial was some of the ballot measures wanted to require every candidate to petition onto the ballot, but the current 310 retains party meetings as one way for candidates to get on the ballot. As we said before, all candidates must run in the primary election. And there were also some proposals to change the way we fill vacancies in office, but 310 is not talking about that. All candidate primaries. So the main idea is that all the candidates run in one contest for a particular office. Regardless of party, all the voters can vote in that primary. And this is arguably increases the overall voice of the electorate, but it reduces the voice of the majority party to choose a single nominee. That's what happens right now. And all candidate primaries are more likely to result in a competitive election in the general election. That wasn't true for the Adam Schiff versus Steve Garvey election that's coming up this fall in California, but anyway, it's I guess it would be about the same as if they had had a Democratic nominee and a Republican nominee in California. So I guess it's no different in that sense in California, but okay. One of the things that is important for people in the voting methods world to understand is that we're using this thing called limited voting in the primary. So each voter can choose one candidate, but more than one moves on for advance. And instead of voting for 4 and then having 4 advance, we only get to vote for 1, and that results in a semi-proportional mix of candidates. And that means you have a more diverse mix of the 4 candidates. So for instance, somebody in North Dakota was saying you'd have 2 Republicans and a very extreme third conservative candidate, and then you'd have maybe a Democratic kind of candidate, Democratic Party candidate. So that's more diverse than what you get in our current system.
Celeste?
Yeah.
I'm struggling with this. I mean, there's no proportionality because in my mind, because the 4 candidates are just candidates. They don't have any decision-making thing. There's nothing that ends up being proportional. And I would say I mean, I still like it, but less diverse in the sense that it's a smaller number. So I don't understand this slide.
You mean because there are only 4 and not more candidates?
Right.
But it's semi-proportional because you could get, like, in a Democratic Party dominant district, you could get 2 Democrats in the final 4. And
Okay,
not just
so
1.
it cuts both ways is really my point. I don't know. Yeah, okay. I would frame it differently. I don't think proportionality is part of this, but it has other benefits that I support.
Ron. you want to talk about minor parties or unaffiliated candidates, and feel free to talk about any of this stuff if you want, or I can go through it.
No, I'll assume that maybe everybody on the call has already read the white paper that you presented before, and this probably came up. But the reason that I'm here, what I'd like to add to this is I appreciate the analysis that you all have done. The league probably has done a better job detailing this and highlighting this stuff. You guys have experts. The league has obviously been active for decades on this kind of stuff. So generally speaking, I support your analysis and your summary. I guess where you all are kind of figuring out where you're going to be on this, I think cutting to the chase, you know, the bottom line is how I see this, and Professor Maskett, maybe you can weigh in as well, is what's going to happen is the parties will game this out immediately after it passes. So if it were to pass, if the parties decide, if the Democrats, because this is a Democratic state now, if the Democrats decide to not tweak it in the legislature, so they don't want to risk alienating Kent theory and the populace. Okay, so assume that the Democrats just leave it as is. What will happen in effect? And I know I'm somewhat familiar with Maine. I know that Alaska just kind of instituted something, Final Four, if that's what they have. The two parties haven't really gamed that, and I don't know if they don't do Maine because Maine might have ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting for anybody who can get on the ballot in the fall. This is going to be different because it's going to limit you to 4 people. So going back to maybe what Neil had just said, I mean, it's very unlikely that the outcome is not going to be 2 Democrats in any blue seat, if not 3 Democrats in any blue seat, and a Republican. Or in a red seat, you're going to get at least 2 red candidates, if not 3, and a Democrat. So the reason why you're going to have more choice in the fall than what we have now is because the Democrats and the Republicans are going to figure out they could get lucky and win a seat that they wouldn't normally win because of ranked choice voting, so they could get lucky. What you'll have is a extreme Republican, an extremely liberal Democrat, obviously. They'll be probably your #1 vote getter. And then you're going to get a moderate Democrat and a moderate Republican as the #2 within that party. And it's possible you might get a 3rd D or a 3rd Republican. The only wild card in this, when this passes, the only wild card in this is going to be an unaffiliated an unaffiliated candidate who has enough money to buy what the 2 major parties already provide. And that is the organization, the voter base, and the donor base to allow you to compete. So what will happen, whether this is the goal of this or not, as someone who's spent 14 years in office, and you guys are experts on this too, is a rich candidate, a wealthy candidate, will be able to buy what the 2 major political parties already provide. And the only other minor political party that could even compete would be the Libertarians and the Greens. And even the Libertarians, I think, would be much more viable in our state than the Greens. But they're probably going to lose that 4th slot to a candidate that can afford it, an unaffiliated candidate that can afford it. For wildly blue seats or wildly red seats, so heavily Republican and heavily Democratic, you're not going to see as much interest, okay? But in any swing seat in the state of Colorado, the scenario that I just gave you is the likely scenario. It's the likely outcome. So if the goal is to get more Democrats and Republicans and moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans elected, this will do that. This will achieve that goal. You will probably get more moderate Democrats or moderate Republicans elected. But if your goal is to get more people on the ballot in the fall that are unaffiliated candidates or minor party candidates, then I think 310 actually will kill all of those opportunities for those candidates. And I support third parties. I've always supported minor parties. I think that the public wants this option to be able to vote for these people, even if they're only getting 1% or 2% or 3% or whatever it is. So my interest in 310 is that I think it defeats that bigger goal of allowing more choice in the fall. I certainly support ranked choice voting in concept. I supported the Boulder ballot measure. I hope that we could probably see something like that happen. But I always envision ranked choice voting in the fall with many candidates, not just 4. And maybe Professor Maskett, you could tell me, is this what Maine allows? Does Maine allow people in the fall that are libertarians and Greens and others to be on the ballot, and then you do ranked choice voting? Because I would support that. But 310 doesn't.
I would defer to anyone else here on the specifics on Maine. I don't actually know the answer on that question.
I know a little bit about Maine. Right now, they do not use instant runoff voting in the general election for any state offices. It is against the state constitution right now. They only use instant runoff voting in the primary, because that's a party process, and in the federal elections. So US President, US House of Representatives, and US Senate. They're trying to change that, but that's the way it is right now. So your question is not super relevant, Ron, in terms of for Maine.
Yeah, so I had a thought though. So, first, Ron, thank you for getting legislation out there to and successfully approved to get more ballot access for more candidates. That's fabulous. I certainly want to note that all candidates get a guaranteed spot in the primary, and it's kind of moving that part of the election. I don't know how big a deal it is to know, and this is an explicit question later on, so I guess we can cover it then. But I guess I would say that this particular proposal will give more visibility to independent candidates. I love your approach. You're wondering how it will game out, and I think that's something important to see, and I'm curious what other people think. But one scenario that I think I'd expect is that in the primary, people who want to vote for an unaffiliated candidate or a minor party candidate will feel much more free to do so. There isn't the spoiler issue. If they have a second, if they want to vote for an independent and they also kind of have a backup who's a major party candidate, they'll probably expect that backup is going to get in the final 4 anyway, so they can make that choice in November. But in the meantime, we might see a bunch of folks say, and maybe 5 or 10% is a bunch of folks, but more people willing to spend a vote in the primary on what they really care about, which is one of the main things that the league, I think, is trying to promote. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's a bunch of ways that we see more either independent or minor party candidates who are relatively centrist actually win in interesting districts in the fall, make it onto the final 4 ballot and be seen as an alternative to, some of the really partisan candidates. So I think it will, as I guess you agree, result in less partisan results. And I think some of that might come from the independents. So my notions, but I'm really curious what people think.
Comments, anybody?
See, Joe's got his hand up.
Joe, go ahead.
Well, I'll wait. Seth had his hand up, I think, germane to this discussion. I'll wait. I have a question, so I'll wait.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to thank you. I'll just jump in on this real quick. I think Ron is right on the point that the parties will react strategically to this if it passes. That's a pattern we tend to see in other states. We don't have a ton of history on top four to understand just what they'll do. But California was an interesting example. We've had about a decade of top two there. And seeing how the parties have reacted to that. One of the major threats, as far as the parties are concerned there in the top two system, is that if they have too many candidates running, even if it's a district that favors their own party, they can end up splitting the vote and throwing the election to the other party. So even in like a Democratic leaning district, you can end up with 2 or 3 Democrats running. If there's just one Republican, the Republican can win that. And so what we've seen them do is start, using a system of very public endorsements of candidates, and really kind of rallying behind one Democrat or one Republican and making it clear this is the party's choice, this is the party's functional nominee, long before the initial primary election happens. If that happens, and that was part of the problem that Republicans ran into in Alaska when they first started moving to top four. And in many ways, it was the presence of 2 Republicans, including Sarah Palin, that really cost the party a pretty reliably Republican seat there. So I would expect there to be some sort of reaction to that. The question is sort of what happens if you do see the parties kind of trying to signal this is the one true Republican, this is the one true Democrat. Theoretically, you could get a situation where 1 or 2 of those other positions on the top 4 ballot ends up going to a third-party candidate or an independent candidate. It's hard to know. In some districts, honestly, the parties have a hard time fielding more than one candidate. But in others, they've had to really particularly if it's a very competitive election, if it's for Congress or for Senate, sometimes they have to beat them off with a stick. So it can really vary a good deal from district to district. So I think you could have a situation where the party's actions actually result in 1 or 2 independents getting on the ballot. That doesn't really increase their chances of winning it, but they would be on the ballot. But in others, yeah, you would see some frozen out.
So you bring up an excellent point, Seth, about endorsement process changing. And I don't know if Tony is with us or not. Her camera is looking somewhere like at the ceiling, maybe. But I wonder if Tony, maybe you have some idea of what, we typically don't get involved in primaries, but because this would be not a partisan primary in the sense that a party controls it, it would be an all-candidate first election that would winnow down to the general election. It's not the same situation. And should the league be extra concerned about the endorsement battle that Seth is talking about, or
I'm not sure how. I mean, people have been talking about gaming the system. If you use ranked choice voting, that's what we do now. I don't see the difference.
Well, in this new primary idea, you would get to vote for one, but and 4 would advance, which is good. That reduces the error if you can advance 4, but it may lead to more party involvement. And here's the league trying to stay nonpartisan, and so that's where my question is. Maybe there's not an answer. This is unknown.
Yeah. We tend to stay out of party decisions and politics, but times are changing, and this would be something that we would have to discuss in the future to see exactly what is happening. But again, I mean, people support candidates, they throw a whole bunch of money in there. You know, you got 4 people now. People will be doing the same thing if there's somebody who follows their line of thinking. And I just don't see a difference in this other than there are fewer people.
Joe,
Somebody have
you
an
had a
answer?
question?
Is there a difference?
Yeah, I don't know. Joe, you had a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So I would like to back up a little bit. I'm not nearly as steeped in this as all of you all are, but I'm just confused. I'm looking at I think you called it the explainer, that
Yes.
has the 3 columns, no change, current, proposed. And under no change, I see candidates get on the primary ballot through a party process, convention, or by a caucus, an assembly, and or by petitioning or collecting signatures. But then I see that this, I guess, is it 310 that's going to change it, and primaries won't be like they were before. I don't understand which way it
So
is.
the difference is that everybody would appear on the primary ballot. Now, how you get on the primary ballot would not change. You would either have to go through, say, a caucus and assembly, or you would have to collect signatures. The difference would be that not every party would be on the general election ballot. So right now, if you on the screen, I've got the general election. Right now, minor parties are guaranteed ballot access for their candidates on the general election ballot. But that would not be true, whoops, for the proposal. The only way you would get on the general ballot would be to be one of the top 4 vote getters. In Alaska, it's interesting, they allow a write-in. So they actually let you rank 5. But we would not allow a write-in according to the way I read the ballot measure. Does that answer your question, Joe?
No, I'm sure it's just me. So you got Democrats and Republicans.
Describe the way that you understand ballot access working right now, and
well, for the in the county level, and I'm sure Pat and Frank can help me understand this. But at the county level now, it is, as you say, there's no change. You either petition onto the ballot with signatures, or you go through the caucus and assembly process, and you become a candidate. And if you say that's the way it's going to be now, that's not going to change.
Well, what's going to change is that right now, all those people on the primary ballot run as only against other Democrats, or only in a Republican primary. And then one person is chosen to go on. In this situation, the Republicans, the Democrats, the Greens, Libertarians all get on the ballot the way they do now, except some of those smaller parties tend to sort of skip the primary. But they won't be able to skip the primary now. They'll have to be in the primary. And then 4 of those candidates will advance to the general.
So the Democrats and the Republicans will have each a person.
Not necessarily. I mean, probably, because we have 4 advancing. So you only need 25% of the vote. If you get 25% of the vote, you will advance to the general election. And a lot of people with less than 25% of the vote will probably advance. If one person gets 50%, then the other 3 candidates don't need 25% to move on.
Okay, sorry.
You just need 20%. Let me think that through.
No, you need 25%. At 4 candidates could all get 25%. They would all advance, right? If you get 20,
Yeah.
It's just your
if you
top
get
4.
20, if you get 25%, you automatically advance. Barb.
Well, this is helping. I need some clarification as my mind just kind of goes blank when I try to sort this all out. But so there could be, what would you anticipate the most number of candidates that might come on the ballot for a particular office?
I think for some offices where we are desperate for candidates, we'll be happy to have one for a single office. But for something like governor or US Senate, some high profile one, we could get a lot of candidates running in the primary.
Yeah, well, I can see how this can impact the minor parties because they can automatically move into the general election where they may not ever make it out of this phase of winnowing down the numbers to go to the general election.
So one of the things that happened in Alaska after Final Four passed was that some minor party voters, registered voters, sued and said, this is not okay. We're not guaranteed that our candidate will be on the general election ballot, and they lost. Okay. So that doesn't mean that will be true in Colorado, but that's what happened in Alaska. Okay. Shall we move on? And because we have some questions to talk about?
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Can I just have a final comment before you move on?
Of course.
So I mean, I guess the issue for me, and I hope some of you are thinking this, is I don't support something that's just going to help the major parties, which is what I see this doing. I mean, this is going to help the major parties because now instead of getting one candidate on the ballot in the fall, they have a chance of at least getting two candidates on the ballot. And in any blue district, the Democrats are guaranteed to get two. In any red district, the Republicans are guaranteed to get two. And then you should get a Democrat and you should get a Republican as well. So again, it's really just, do you see 310 as a vehicle that is helpful in the long run for what you envision democracy is all about? If you think it's all about moderating the two major parties, then this certainly will do that. And it will also help, like I said, any unaffiliated candidate that might be able to spin their way onto the ballot. But I just don't see this as a benefit for little d democracy. I see this as a benefit for the two major parties when most of the general public is unaffiliating with the two major parties, at least in the state of Colorado. Half of the state is not, half of the registered voters here are not Democrats or Republicans. They're unaffiliated. So I don't see this as advancing the ball forward. I see this as kind of a deal with the devil in that you get ranked choice voting, but it's at a pretty high cost in my mind. What I would rather see, and if this were to pass, I would certainly hope that the league, if this were to pass, would get behind maybe doing a ranked choice voting that allows for more candidates to be on the ballot in the fall. In other words, just because Alaska does top 4 now, and California does top 2 or whatever they have, you know, for ranked choice voting, in my mind, it's about maybe, or instant runoff voting, whatever you want to call it. I see that as if you've got 10 candidates, rank the 10 candidates, or if you've got 6 candidates, rank 6 candidates, but limiting someone to just 4, where the Democrats and Republicans are bound to get 3 out of 4 of those. I just don't see this as a benefit.
I think Ron goes to an important issue too, remembering that this is a statutory proposal. And so things can change over time in the legislature or, you know, at the ballot also. But it's, you know, if we find that something doesn't work very well, or it's not what we thought it was, we do have opportunities with the legislature to fix some of them.
So Joe had a question in the chat about if this is going to benefit the major parties, why are the major parties against it? And to answer your question, Joe, I would say the major parties are against it because they will lose some of control over their own political process of nominating a candidate, and they'll still be able to endorse. Maybe they'll have to figure that out. But the minor parties are very much against it for the reasons that Ron has brought up. So RCV for Colorado at the title board, they came out against these because they would not guarantee general election ballot access for the minor parties. So maybe all the parties are against this. I also wanted to say, Ron, so when you were talking, I was thinking of the Colorado Springs congressional election, where Dave Williams, a very controversial character, the chair of the GOP, is running for the congressional district seat, and his Republican opponent is Jeff Flake. Is that his name? Or Jeff Crank, or I'm not sure. I don't vote in that district. But I've heard not very good things about both of them. And because it's a safe Republican seat, or it seems like it is, although a Democrat won the nonpartisan mayoral contest, because it's a safe Republican seat, whoever wins that partisan primary is probably going to win unless there's a whole lot of backlash because of the controversy. But under this 310 scenario, both of those Republicans would probably advance, plus two more people who would be less controversial.
Right. This is why the two parties, as a member, as an office holder in a party, I can tell you why the two parties are going to hate this.
I can too.
They're going to hate this because let's just go ahead to 2026. Okay, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. If this were to pass, Kent Thiry, who wants to run for governor, will definitely be one of your top four that gets out of the primary to become a governor. So he gets out of the all-candidate primary. So if the Democrats are smart, they'll only put up one person because they certainly don't want to split the vote. So they'll have one person come out of that primary. Republicans will do the same. No one's going to get 50% on your first vote. So who do you think wins? It's guaranteed who's going to win. Kent Thiry. He's going to be everyone's number two choice. I mean, this is going to happen in every single swing district in the state.
That's only if he's not eliminated on the first vote, which is the center squeeze, which is what happened in Alaska. So I would not posit that. But I think we should move on because there's a great set of questions that Celeste has. But my guess is, and I'm not an expert, that you're wrong, Ron, that this will actually loosen up a bunch of different things.
So are you saying
that's why the parties are against it?
Are you saying Kent Thiry will run as an unaffiliated candidate and win because of money? That's what you're saying, right?
I'm saying that Kent Thiry everybody knows he will be running as an unaffiliated candidate in 2026. Okay. He will certainly be one of your top four because he will spend millions to be one of your top four. And when he does that, and he's on the ballot, he's not going to win 50% on the first vote, but the Democrats and the Republicans don't win 50% on the first vote either. So he's basically guaranteed to win the second.
No, because he might get eliminated first. And then you'd have, just like in Alaska, where you had two extreme candidates and the moderate candidate in the middle gets eliminated. That's what happened in Alaska. It's a center squeeze. So, but regardless, it doesn't protect us, and get to the candidate that everybody would like. I agree that that's one reason that the parties don't like it. I don't really care what the parties like, and that's why I kind of disagree with your guess as to how this will work out.
But so Ron, your concern is that unaffiliated candidates without money can't make it into the general election. Like if Kent Thiry runs as an unaffiliated, he's got enough money, he can blow past any challenges. but you're concerned about the unaffiliated that don't have all the money, right?
Right. So when I say the two parties will game this, so yes, so what you've done, if this were to pass in effect, is you're limiting the people that would be on the fall general election ballot that is not limited right now. Like you can be an unaffiliated candidate and petition your way on in the fall. And all minor parties would have their candidate on in the fall.
Yeah, but you can argue that there's no real choice in the fall if it's a safe seat for one party or the other.
Yeah.
No. What I'm
Show
saying
up
is
on the ballot.
Right now.
What I'm saying is the difference is it's ranked choice voting gives all of those candidates more choices in the fall if they can get on that fall ballot. So that's why I said I love the concept of ranked choice voting. And I think the public likes it too. But when you're limiting it to 4 or 3, you very much limited the options of the voters in the fall.
It turns out that in Colorado and in Idaho, where this will probably be on the ballot, they have done surveys and people like the quote open primary, the all candidate primary, and they don't. They have a lot of problems with the instant runoff voting section of it. So yeah, it's different maybe from what you think. Joe, why don't you speak up?
So what's the matter with Ron's point earlier that say 1 or 2 Republicans and 1 or 2 Democrats and an unaffiliated and a green person and a libertarian person meet their party's criteria with having 5 or 6 people on the ballot? Why must it be 4? Thank you.
You can have 20 on the ballot in the primary. But the way this works is the primary election winnows down to the top 4 vote getters who then compete against each other again in the primary. I mean, in the general.
I think Celeste has a great set of questions that will help us get to a decision, which we have to do in 30 minutes. So,
okay, we'll move on. This question that Mark put in the chat about opposite party voters effectively decide which dominant party candidate to elect is considered a bug and a feature depending, a bug or a feature depending on who you talk to. So anyway, let's move on. So a little bit about the mechanics or about the instant runoff voting part of the election. Exhausted ballots mean that you will not necessarily have a majority winner. There is some voter strategy in instant runoff voting. A lot of people say, oh, I voted for 3 candidates. No, you've ranked 3 candidates. Only your number 1 ranking is guaranteed to be counted. So there's a lot of invisible ranking that never gets seen in instant runoff voting. And that's different from a voting method like approval voting or score voting, where everybody's preferences are seen during the tabulation. And there are a lot of issues with implementing instant runoff voting. It's untested in a populous state like Colorado. We use risk limiting audits. We have multiple election software vendors. Each county gets to choose their own. The longer ballots are going to affect the cost of paper, postage, and handling. So this is why that amendment was introduced at the last minute to slow down the process if 310 passes. And then the final thing to say here is that the League is a strong proponent of proportional representation, and we could argue that this is a mediocre reform, especially for elected bodies. Single winner elections do not inherently promote structural improvements or inherently promote proportional representation. And instant runoff voting, as you saw on the previous slide, involves some voter strategy. Some of the partisan primary issues are still around in instant runoff voting. Okay, we have a mission. We work to empower voters and defend democracy. We have a vision. We want every voter to have the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate in elections. There are, I think, 6 questions here. So this one, number 1, speaks to Ron's concern. Which ballot access method best aligns with our mission and vision? The current system where every party is guaranteed a single candidate in the general, top end systems, or such as the Final Four, where every party is guaranteed the right to multiple candidates in the primary, but then only a certain number advance to the general, or skipping the primary altogether and just having everybody run in a general election. This is what they do in Louisiana. And then they'll have a runoff if needed, if nobody gets a majority in that first, in that general election. And then, you know, should we not even have political parties involved at all? Some states just let you pay a filing fee or collect signatures from any elector to get on the ballot. Any comments on this?
Do we have a comparison?
Yes.
Tony, do we have a comparison of those different methods? Has somebody researched that?
Comparison in what way? I mean, the current system is A. The proposal is B. C is what they do like in Louisiana or in nonpartisan elections in Colorado where they don't have parties.
I think this takes us away from what we need to decide at the moment, because these things are not before us. But I would be interested to know if any research has been done about the various kinds.
Yeah, and I'd like to see a comparison. I mean, I still think I'm a novice at understanding all these different systems and their implementation, and their impacts and what they may or may not be. But I'd really like to know what a pro and a con is in relationship to a goal of either our mission and vision. But it's hard for me to compare and contrast, and I need some more.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is, in terms of research or pros and cons, is what are the advantages and disadvantages of the current system?
Yeah.
So we had in a previous slide 3 problems with partisan primaries, 1 benefit and 1 question.
Right.
So like, do they incentivize polarization? Do they allow more many voters to have a meaningful voice? There's the question of money in politics. How would we know how it works in the current system? It's a little less clear how it works in a Final Four system, partly because the only place where they've had a Final Four is in Alaska. And at the same time that they passed Final Four in the same exact ballot measure, they had a whole bunch of campaign finance stuff. So I don't know. I haven't studied that portion of it. We can just move on and say, we've looked at this and we'll think about it some more.
I have a question that I've been thinking about as we've talked about this, and maybe you've answered it someplace. But, you know, it's interesting that I might choose D because somewhere I think the political party system is slowly phasing out as far as how it operates. But that's another conversation. But how many, how has it increased the participation of the unaffiliated voter? Is it anticipated that we're going to get more people involved, or is it still going to be just the people in the parties who really, in minor parties, that care about getting involved at the primary level?
So one of the differences in Colorado is that right now unaffiliated voters get mailed 2 ballots,
Right.
and they get to pick one. In this situation, they would still get mailed 2 ballots for the county level offices and for district attorney, but then they would get 1 ballot with all the other candidates that are running in each office. So it would be, I am hearing an echo. I don't know what that's causing that. So what was your question again?
I'm saying, so like, what does this
Oh,
increase?
so it has,
Unaffiliated
right,
participation.
it has less of an effect in Colorado, but like Peggy Leach, who's unaffiliated, said, I have to decide which ballot I'm going to choose. If they were all candidate primaries, then I wouldn't have to choose. I would just vote in the single contest for governor. I would vote in the single contest for Secretary of State. I wouldn't have to choose which do I care more about, the Democrats running for governor or the Republicans running for Secretary of State? You know, you'd get to vote.
So if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're still just getting you don't get to be in the free for all. You're only going to get your party's ballot for the primary.
That's the situation right now, but for all the ones that are considered covered offices in
Right.
in 310, you would get the same ballot everybody else gets.
Okay.
Everybody would run against everybody else.
And everybody gets that ballot. You're not choosing between Republican, Democrats, or affiliated, or trying to decide which party they want to go with.
Everybody would get that same ballot. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I think what Ron Tuba likes the current system best, or option C. But you know, you could like more than one of these systems too. You don't have to just pick one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to the next question so we can take a look at it and discuss it. I can. Okay, so we talked about party control, and the most party control is a closed primary ballot where only Republicans can vote the Republican ballot, and you can only get on the ballot through an internal party process. There's a whole range here. You could do a maximum party control, except allow candidates to petition to get on the ballot. That opens up the voice of the electorate. It's still party electorate, but it opens it up. What we did before we have our current system was we had a partially open system. Unaffiliated voters could register with the party on election day and vote that party's ballot. And some people would go home and then unregister with that party. So they would be back to unaffiliated. So they would kind of try to, you know, have more voice or game the system or whatever you want to call it. The current system is called open to unaffiliated voters. That's D. And then it goes on from there, where the parties really have even less control. Like you could let anybody sign a candidate petition, and there's some possible Supreme Court challenges to that, so that may not fly. But they tried to get that through the title board, and none of those got title at the title board. So anybody have
So what is
comments?
that? D, is that D, E, and F, or
D is what we have right now.
Right.
E is where the candidate says, I'm the Flying Spaghetti Party, and
Right.
I collect signatures from Flying Spaghetti Party registered voters and from unaffiliated voters, and I get on the ballot. Then there's even less, where I decide I'm Boiling Frog Party and I collect signatures from any elector, Republican, Democrat, whoever. Then parties really lose control. And so we've had some discussion about why are parties against this? And some of it is because they're losing, there's the more voters that are not active party members get to vote in this, and the more other candidates are running besides just party members, the more things can go haywire from the point of view of a party.
Or something that there's a central, in theory, maybe is central platform or something that these people are running on, that
Yeah.
people understand what they're trying to accomplish as a candidate.
The US tried to do without parties. That didn't last very long. Parties are very useful for a cue for voters to help them vote. You know, a lot of times there are battles within a party for who is the best party representative. But the league doesn't usually worry about that because that's internal party stuff. That would come out into the open more under number 310. But not only would party voters be able to vote on that, any voter would be able to vote on that. So it changes the process a lot.
You know, and then we have to go back probably to, you know, what is it that we're trying to accomplish with this proposal, and where is it taking us?
Yeah, so we're down to 14 minutes here.
Okay,
Okay,
moving along.
moving on then, if no more comments on number 2. Okay, so one of the things about 310 is that it has different election systems. If number C is Initiative 310, it uses this final 4 for all state and federal partisan offices except for district attorney and president, but that's different already. And then it uses our current system for county offices. And I just don't understand why they separated out district attorney, or why they're not starting with county offices, which would be so much easier to implement.
Yeah,
And so
I was going to say, I think the more confusing this is to voters, the more problematic it becomes. And, you know, to work from the bottom up, you know, the locals up to the state races. But when there's so many different strip things going on between each of these offices, I think it really becomes confusing to the voters. And I wrote that down. Someplace it was talking about voter exhaustion from trying to figure out what we're doing and how we're doing it and how it's being counted, along with transitioning to a whole new system that people aren't familiar with yet.
So right now in statute, cities are allowed to use instant runoff voting, and counties are required to run those elections for single county cities. Starting in 2026, there should be procedures for multi-county cities. So this is an issue already. And the amendment that was introduced at the last minute would increase the number of cities that would have to do this. It doesn't say that those cities have to be multi-county cities, but it seems like we need to have a multi-county city in order to test cross-county lines. So a lot of these are just like ideas that maybe shouldn't even be considered here. It's the number of A through G options are more just to point out that there are lots of options. And to me, it seems like consistency would be better. So, okay, let me move on to the next one if there are no more questions. So which options to empower voters to cast a meaningful ballot align with the mission and vision? And there I mean, we've got a whole bunch of different options here. B is basically use a better voting method in a single winner contest. C is use proportional voting for an elected body. I mean, all of these are probably good ideas. Maybe we don't need to worry about this right now. Maybe I'll just move on. Okay. Here are more desirable election reform results. And demand and facilitate well-run elections. I think implementing 310 without doing some multi-county cities might be asking a lot. So.
But that's not going to happen based on current legislation. So they're going to figure it out, and hopefully we will do it better. But yeah.
Celeste, what was the option you mentioned earlier that's not really on the table right now, the one that you said you would have liked better?
Don't know, but I know that I would like proportional representation.
Yeah,
so maybe it was C here.
It was one that's not, I don't think it was on any of this paperwork. It was something that you know about from your broader knowledge that you thought was a better way to go than any of the things we're looking at right now. Was what I thought I
Certainly we like proportional voting.
Yeah, I thought it was a different kind of proportional voting that you mentioned, but I don't want to get too sidetracked here. Go ahead.
Okay. The last question is, should the league support, oppose, or be neutral on 310? And because 310 is, you could argue, a moving target because of the amendment that was introduced at the last minute, perhaps we should include an additional statement to advocate for statutory amendments or for different or further electoral reform. And so under B here, B part I, we talked last month about having some sort of working group on proportional representation. And I think that would be a great thing for us to advocate for. And I think that Ron and minor parties should jump on board proportional representation, because they would have a chance to be represented, a better chance. So.
Celeste, this is Tony, and I'd be interested to hear what kinds of reaction Seth has to our conversation, if he's willing to share that, since he's the person who is the political analyst.
I mean, that covers a lot of ground. And if the question here is like, does this initiative, is it consistent with League of Women Voters values? I have a hard time answering that one. But I would say, some of the, I guess in terms of like what the goals are for it, I think it is worth thinking about. I guess that may have been on the previous slide, to just sort of think about, what exactly are you aiming for here, and what are the priorities? One of the things I always like to ask is, would this reform actually improve representation? Would it improve government? And that's a bigger question, and I think somewhat harder to answer. One of the perspectives I always have going into this is like, and some of the conversation has talked about this a little bit, is just like, what effect does this have on parties? And what effect, just how much do you want parties involved in these decisions? I tend to take the point of view that parties are actually really important to this, and that part of the problems we've had with our political system in recent years is parties becoming less responsible, parties having less of a role to play in screening out poor candidates. And I don't know that this necessarily would improve that. In many ways, it could move things in the direction of giving parties even less of a say in who appears on the ballot. Now, we might say parties haven't handled that role particularly well in recent years. I think they've handled it very differently across parties in recent years. But one of the reasons that parties are that I think they are opposed to this reform is because it makes it harder for them to control who their nominee is. It makes it harder for them to have access, determine who has access to running for office and who doesn't, and that just kind of decreases their role in the long run. And I think they actually do have an important role to play in governing. Sorry, Neil, did you have a
Well,
question on
that's a great way to frame it, and I appreciate coming back to that question. And and I also appreciate. Well, I think that this could be argued, and again, I'm thinking out loud, to help parties take responsible positions in how to strategize on how to represent all the voters. Because I think that it is likely, as Ron pointed out, that parties will be trying to come up with, depending on the actual layout of a particular district, come up with candidates who they think can win in front of all the voters when put up against all their other candidates, and that the party leadership will be incented to make a choice such that they actually find someone who can represent all the voters, which I think is one of the key goals of the league. So, I think this can help overall. That's my guess. Yeah. But I think we do want to come back to the question of, with 2 minutes left, what do we think of this initiative? And I'll just, since the slide has already gone up, I'll say I think this is a very positive initiative, despite all the problems that you all have heard me talk about for about 3 decades, with both instant runoff voting because of the center squeeze and other things. But I think that it helps avoid the most common and concerning thing that goes on in Colorado, which is party domination of quote unquote safe seats in ways that elect very extreme candidates, because the voters don't actually get, all the voters don't, the opinions of all the voters don't really end up mattering in the final analysis. So I think that's a huge win. And, I think that we can fix the other problems, hopefully with good advocacy after it's adopted.
It's statutory. Like I said at the beginning, if this were constitutional, we'd probably be opposing it. And some of the versions that were on the ballot were constitutional, but this is statutory. So, Barb.
Yeah, well, thank you for preparing this document. I still need to read the last 4 pages and do a little bit better on comprehension. I'll just say that. But, well, that was I had things broken into 3 categories. One is the goal of our methodology and what it's trying to accomplish. And I think now I have a better understanding of that. That helps. But then I started talking, one of the other issues problematic are costs and implementation, like changing equipment, the paper issue. I don't know, I can't remember. I wrote down here primary, general, or one. Maybe that's because I was trying to sort that all out. But equipment for everybody, getting all that sorted out, and the paper that we'd use and the cost related to it. And then, what's the voter impact? And it was that voter fatigue or maybe confusion about what they're doing. It's going to take a lot of education to bring them up to speed. So those are the 2 issues the things I've been thinking about that we need to probably discuss as much too.
Thanks everybody. I guess we have some discussion and
You're gonna take
I
us,
appreciate everybody's contributions.
what's the process at this point? I was assuming we were gonna have a straw poll or something.
Did you see
No.
my question there? When's the decision deadline?
So this is Tony. It was Tuesday morning, but we were going to be a little flexible about that. What we had suggested we do is to do an email vote after this meeting.
So, Tony, who gets to vote? Do you want to explain that?
There are people that are designated as members of the voting elections committee, also the judicial elections group. And those people on my list are Celeste Landry, Peggy Leach, Holly Monkman, Gaithia Wise, and Jerry Cummins. If anybody objects to their name not being there, would you please send that to Celeste and we'll look at it.
Tony, I'm going to just pass it right on to you. You're my boss.
Okay, fine with me. Fine with me. We'll take care of it. But we will do an email vote. And I don't know why Neil's not there.
Yeah, I'd love to. I don't see Peggy here.
Peggy had a meeting. I thought she'd be joining us
Yeah.
30 minutes in.
Well,
Gaithia joined us late.
So that's a technical thing that we've offered, that if you think your name should be on the list, go ahead and send it to me, apparently. And we will do an email vote.
It has to be league member. You have to be a league member.
Yes, that's true.
And the reason those names were on that that Tony listed is that we have been the Legislative Action Committee members, and that means we are the volunteer lobbyists on elections and voting for the league at the state legislature. So that's what we know. I thought I might head off to this other meeting in Washington on disability and disabled voters and RCV, and see how that goes. Betsy, I'm glad you could make it, and I need to touch base with you on what happened at the earlier meeting that we were at today. Everybody has my email, so feel free to contact me, and we'll have another meeting in July. And I'm sure we'll have figured something out before then on 310. And I think we're also probably going to have a signing statement, if you will, on 310, not just support, oppose, or neutral, but we'll have some other, maybe something about proportional representation or something like that. So,
Celeste, can you just let me know what the final decision is whenever you guys come up with it?
Absolutely. So the process is the 5 people on that list and anybody else who gets added to that list will make a recommendation, and then the entire team of lobbyists will vote on the recommendation, and they could overturn that recommendation, and then it will be announced by the staff lobbyist, probably. Pretty much that's the process, right? I got it more or less right. Tony?
Yes, no, you did. And there is another step in there. We do have a sort of a overseeing group that may have some comments to make, but they generally will not overturn any group of members' opinions.
These are the Action and Advocacy Leadership folks.
TMAC.
TMAC, yes. That's TMAK, 4 people. And T is not Tony. I
Yes,
can't
it
believe
is. Yeah, it's
Oh, it
5
is?
people. It's 5
Okay.
people and it's Tony.
2 T's, got it.
Right.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks, everybody.
I'm going to
Yeah,
stop the
thank you.
recording.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.